Chapter 1: The Denial of a Future. Ethan Daniels had always played it safe. In a world of flashy tech startups and reckless spending, he prided himself on being responsible. No gambling, no debt, a clean digital footprint. His life in Portland was quiet, efficient, and secure. After years of saving, he and his girlfriend decided it was time to buy their first home. It was supposed to be a milestone, something stable, something earned. The pre-approval meeting felt routine. Ethan wore his pressed shirt and brought neatly organized paperwork. They sat across from the mortgage broker in a quiet office filled with plants and clean glass. His confidence didn't waver until the woman reviewing his application suddenly frowned and tilted her screen away. Her tone changed. She asked him if he was aware of a bankruptcy filing from the previous year. Ethan blinked, confused. No, he hadn't declared anything. But the system said otherwise. Multiple accounts had been delinquent. His credit score had dropped by nearly 400 points. She couldn't approve anything. He left the office stunned. The city felt colder, sharper, as he walked back to his car. He scrolled through his phone for explanations, old emails, bank alerts, anything. Nothing made sense. It had to be a mistake, an error in the system, a stolen identity maybe. That night, sleep wouldn't come. His mind churned with questions he couldn't answer. The next day, he ordered his full credit report. The envelope arrived 2 days later, thick and heavy. Inside was a stranger's financial life wearing his name. 7 credit cards, 2 personal loans, 1 debt consolidation contract, a bankruptcy, all filed under Ethan Daniels, but he had never touched them. Addresses listed in the applications traced back to Eugene, his hometown, his mother's house. He hadn't lived there in over a decade, but according to the banks, it was still his official address. 1 loan was approved for a new laptop, another for luxury home furnishings. Ethan sat still for a long time. He checked the timestamps on the loan applications. They stretched back over 2 years. Someone had been slowly building this profile. He stared at the signatures. They looked like his, at a glance anyway, but they weren't. The pen strokes felt wrong, too wide, too practiced. Someone had copied him. The thought hit him with quiet brutality. His mother, Carla Daniels. The only person who had access to his social security card, his old bank statements, his passwords. He remembered the time she'd borrowed his mail by accident, the time she'd asked him to forward a tax document. It all came back. Ethan didn't want to believe it. Not her. Not the woman who raised him after his dad left. Not the woman who worked double shifts and skipped meals to buy him textbooks. But the signs were everywhere. Her address, her stores, her patterns. She hadn't just borrowed his name, she'd built a second life with it. He went for a walk to clear his head. The sun was setting over the Willamette River, casting gold onto the water. His heart pounded, not from fear, but betrayal. It wasn't just about money. She'd taken his future, his credit, his trust. And she hadn't even asked. Back at home, he opened every financial account he had. He set new passwords, froze his credit, flagged his name with the fraud bureau. Each click felt like a tiny wall going up, a fortress he should never have had to build. But he wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. Instead, he printed the credit report, underlined key lines in red, and built a timeline. He copied every date, every transaction. He contacted each lender and requested additional documentation. He logged IP addresses, traced emails, and compared handwriting. His cybersecurity background had never felt so personal. What hurt most wasn't the loans or the accounts. It was that she hadn't stopped. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, and it had escalated. She was still using his name, still signing, still spending, and the world kept assuming it was him. Ethan realized something that night, staring at the pages. If he didn't act, she wouldn't stop. She'd burn through his future the way she had burned through his childhood savings. Only now, it wasn't just about cleaning up her mess. It was about drawing a line. That line began with silence, with planning. He wasn't going to confront her in tears. He wasn't going to beg for an apology. He was going to catch her with the same precision she once used to raise him. And when it was time, she would face not his pain, but the evidence. Chapter 2. The Woman in the Mirror. Ethan drove to Eugene the following weekend. He didn't tell his mother why. He said he missed her, wanted to spend time together. That wasn't a lie, not exactly. He did want to see her, but not for comfort. He needed to look her in the eyes and see if she flinched. See if guilt showed up in her hands. See if the woman who raised him could really be the woman who had quietly destroyed him. Carla greeted him like she always had, arms open, smile wide, too much perfume. Her house was cleaner than usual, as if guests were expected. The kitchen sparkled. There were fresh flowers in the vase that used to hold loose change and grocery lists. Something felt staged. Ethan noticed it immediately, but said nothing. She talked too fast, asked too many questions, made his favorite lunch, though he hadn't mentioned his preferences in years. Her voice was cheerful, but she avoided eye contact when he brought up work or money. He let her ramble, watching every gesture. It was like observing a character she was trying to play. She was rehearsed. Too rehearsed. The living room had changed since his last visit. New curtains, new throw pillows, a new flat screen. Ethan asked politely about them. Carla said she'd gotten a little help from the credit union, just a small line of credit. Her laugh after the statement was thin, nervous. He nodded, said nothing, but inside, something twisted. On her desk sat a brand new laptop, same model and color as the one listed in the fraudulent purchases. The sticker from the store still clung to the frame. The keyboard hadn't even been worn in. It was positioned carefully, angled just so. A showpiece, another clue, another confirmation. Ethan took a mental photo. He asked casually if she still had her old Social Security documents, pretending he needed help finding one of his own. For a split second, her smile froze. Her hand flexed. Then the cheerfulness returned, and she began telling a story about losing paperwork during a move. He nodded along, tracking the tremor in her voice. That moment told him everything. She was guilty. Not guessing, not suspicious. He knew. The hesitation, the lie, the careful reset of her face. Carla had always been a skilled manipulator. When he was a child, she could guilt him into anything with a glance. But now he wasn't that child. He was watching her. That evening, he wandered the old house. In the hallway closet, he found a new pair of boots, luxury brand, the same one tied to a charge on his card. There was no hiding it now. This was her theater, and he was her uninvited audience. She had built a life from borrowed things, stolen names. At dinner, he asked how she was managing money. She waved the question away, said she had things under control. He asked about retirement, credit cards, taxes. Each question landed like a drop of ink on white paper. She nodded, smiled, redirected. He watched her sweat under the surface. He cataloged every reaction. He didn't sleep much that night. Lying in the guest room, surrounded by childhood books and a bed that creaked with memory, he stared at the ceiling. The woman in the next room had packed his lunches and read him bedtime stories. And now she was draining his future while humming old songs in her kitchen. The next morning, he left early. She hugged him goodbye, tighter than usual, her perfume clinging to his clothes. As he pulled away from the driveway, he felt nothing. No warmth, no grief, just a kind of sober focus. The evidence was here. It had a heartbeat. It wore his mother's face. Back in Portland, Ethan got to work. He opened encrypted folders on his computer, scanned in notes, receipts, timestamps. He began building a case, not for the police yet, but for himself. He needed to be sure. Not emotionally, legally. Every click, every search, every copy was a thread in a growing net. He knew what was coming. The moment of confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. But he wouldn't yell. He wouldn't accuse. He would expose. She had played with numbers and names. He would respond with data. The next time they spoke, it wouldn't be as mother and son. It would be as suspect and witness. Chapter 3, The Honey Trap. Ethan didn't rush. Emotionally, he burned, but strategically, he waited. He knew better than to act without leverage. In cybersecurity, timing mattered. You don't confront a breach mid-infiltration. You study it, map its paths, set a trap. And so, he built one, not with firewalls, but with his mother's greed. He created a new bank account, unlinked, untraceable, intentionally vulnerable. It looked like a soft spot, like an amateur mistake. He deposited a small sum, then sent himself an email from a dummy address, filled with fake account information, transaction logs, and digital slips. Then he made sure that email was visible on his old tablet, the one he knew his mother still had access to. Years ago, he'd synced the devices and never fully revoked her privileges. It was a risk, but a calculated one. If she was still snooping, she'd find it. If she wasn't, he'd know. 3 days passed. Nothing. Then, one night, his phone buzzed. Login attempt. His bank flagged it. The IP address came from Eugene, from his childhood street. A second alert followed. Someone had tried to initiate a wire transfer. The transfer was blocked, but that wasn't the point. The bait had worked. He reported the incident to the bank's fraud department. As a cybersecurity insider, he knew the language. He requested metadata, login timestamps, device IDs. The trail pointed to an Android phone registered under Carla's email. It was like finding her fingerprints on a locked vault. He saved every byte. He called his contact in digital forensics, a former colleague who now worked for a private firm. Quietly, they reconstructed the login session. The password used was an old one Ethan hadn't touched since college. One his mother had seen him write down during a tax season years ago. She'd remembered. There was no denying it anymore. No possibility that she had acted by accident. She had broken into a digital account after locating it, interpreting it, and bypassing protections. Not a mother's mistake, a criminal's maneuver. Ethan felt the final thread snap inside him. This wasn't emotional, it was calculated theft. But he wasn't done. He needed a moment she couldn't talk her way out of, something undeniable. So he contacted a dealership in Eugene where she'd recently tried to lease a new SUV. He pretended to be a financial investigator, using credentials from a fraud prevention agency he did consulting work for. He asked if she'd be open to reapplying. She was, enthusiastically. And when the call came, through a recorded line she didn't know about, Carla confirmed everything. Ethan, listening from a second line, heard her say his full name, his social security number, his birth date, and even his childhood nickname. He sat there in silence, gripping the headset. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. She wasn't guessing. She'd done this before. It felt less like theft and more like a routine. When the call ended, he stared at the screen for a long time. Then slowly, he pressed save. The file glowed in the folder, like a detonator. It wasn't just about protecting himself anymore. It was about drawing a boundary. Her theft had been subtle, quiet, and deeply invasive. A lifetime of guilt and gaslighting had made it hard to see. But now he saw clearly. She wasn't helping him. She was hollowing him out and calling it love. He printed a copy of the transcript, labeled every log, and prepared a timeline. Each entry had a date, a device, an action. This wasn't a story. It was a report. If she denied it, he'd show her signature. If she cried, he'd play the call. If she begged, he'd present the timestamps. And still, a quiet part of him hoped she would stop, that she would see the line she crossed and retreat. But deep down, he knew better. People who borrow your name without permission don't usually ask for forgiveness. They wait to be caught or keep going. She had chosen her path. Now he had chosen his. Chapter 4, Blood on the Ledger. Ethan walked into the police station with a binder. Not an emotional plea, not a tear-stained letter. A case file. Inside were over 70 pages, statements, call logs, video stills, digital audit trails. He wore a pressed shirt and spoke clearly. His voice didn't shake. He wasn't a son seeking help. He was a victim reporting a felony. The desk officer hesitated. Family fraud made people uncomfortable. Filing charges against a parent wasn't common. The questions came softly. "Are you sure? Could this be a misunderstanding?" Ethan handed over the audio recording. After a minute, the officer's expression changed. It became official. The detective assigned to the case reviewed the file for 2 days before calling Ethan in. Her tone was professional, but something in her eyes said she'd seen this before. Different names, same pain. She confirmed what he already knew. The evidence was damning. They'd move forward with charges. A week later, Carla Daniels was arrested at home. No handcuffs, no drama. A polite knock, a warrant, a short conversation. She told the officers she didn't understand, that it was a mistake, that she was just helping her son. She wore her gardening gloves and cried at the right moment, but the paper trail didn't cry with her. The arraignment took place in a small courtroom, the kind where lives change under flickering fluorescent lights. Carla arrived in beige, her hair curled, her expression neutral. Her lawyer did most of the talking. Ethan sat across the aisle, silent, eyes forward. He didn't speak. He let the documents do it for him. The prosecution presented the timeline first. 7 fraudulent accounts opened using Ethan's credentials. Everyone linked to Carla's address, devices, and spending habits. Screenshots from bank portals, video from the credit union lobby. Voice print authentication matched to Carla's phone. It was more than enough. Then came the audio. The dealership call played through tinny speakers. Carla's voice, calm and clear, confirming Ethan's personal data. The courtroom went quiet. Even her attorney seemed momentarily still. Ethan didn't look at her. He looked at the floor. There was no satisfaction in hearing it again, only finality. Her lawyer argued that Carla hadn't meant harm, that she misunderstood, that she was simply managing finances for her son. But the judge had reviewed the evidence privately. He interrupted the defense. "Misunderstandings don't involve falsified signatures," he said. "They don't span 2 years, and they don't end with bankruptcy filings." When the judge asked if Carla had anything to say, she stood slowly, looked at Ethan, and shook her head. Not in denial, just resignation. She said nothing. No apology, no explanation, just silence. In that moment, Ethan knew he would never hear the words he once craved. "I'm sorry." She pled guilty to wire fraud and identity theft. The sentencing was mild by legal standards: restitution, supervised probation, mandatory financial counseling. No jail time. But to Ethan, it wasn't about punishment. It was about recognition, about truth being said out loud in a room that mattered. After the hearing, Carla walked past him. Their eyes met for less than a second. Her face was unreadable. Not shame, not anger, just absence. Like something had collapsed inside her long before she'd ever signed his name on a dotted line. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He let her walk away. Outside, the wind had picked up. The leaves scraped along the sidewalk like whispers. He stood there for a moment, binder still in hand, then finally exhaled. Not in relief, but in release. The fight was over. What came next would be something else entirely. His credit score would take years to repair. Some debts would linger in dark corners of the system. He would have to explain the fraud on every loan and application. But the hardest part was already done. He had faced the truth, not the fantasy, and he had chosen reality. He no longer carried the illusion that blood protects or that love justifies. In that courtroom, he hadn't been her son. He'd been her victim. And now, he was something else entirely. Something stronger. Someone free. Chapter 5. A Name of His Own. In the weeks after the sentencing, Ethan felt hollow. Not broken, not even angry, just emptied. Like everything he believed about family had been poured out. He still went to work, still answered emails, still fixed security flaws for clients. But inside, he was rearranging himself, rebuilding from below the surface. He received the first repayment installment by mail, a check from Carla's court-ordered restitution. He didn't cash it. He couldn't bring himself to touch that money. It felt radioactive. Not compensation, but contamination. He locked it in a drawer and forgot about it. At night, he lay awake thinking about his name. How many forms had it been on? How many systems now flagged him for risk? His name wasn't clean anymore, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. It was compromised. He had become a red flag in the digital world he once navigated with ease. He changed his passwords, security questions, even deleted old emails. But the name remained, on leases, in databases, in search results. It felt like a brand someone else had burned into his skin. His name had been stolen, used, and returned to him damaged. He wanted it back, or wanted it gone. So he did what most wouldn't. He filed for a legal name change, a quiet, personal ritual. He didn't tell anyone, not even his girlfriend. He filled out the forms, listed security breach and family identity fraud as his reason. The clerk didn't ask questions. Maybe she'd seen it before. When the judge signed off, Ethan walked out of the courthouse carrying a folder that felt heavier than anything from his mother's trial. He looked down at the new name on the document and felt something unfamiliar. Control. It was his. Undamaged. Unused by anyone but him. A blank page. He updated his credit file, his bank records, his digital certificates. It took weeks. Some systems glitched, others pushed back. But slowly, piece by piece, he reclaimed his digital self. He was no longer a person flagged for bankruptcy. He was a new entity, still him, but untangled from her. The process gave him focus. Each update was like a thread sewn into a torn fabric. Each correction, a quiet form of healing. He wrote a checklist, color-coded the steps, and tracked progress obsessively. It wasn't just admin work. It was survival, his way of turning chaos into order. During this time, he launched a small blog, just a personal space. He didn't name names. He didn't describe his mother or her crimes. Instead, he wrote about digital boundaries, about trust, about the signs of quiet exploitation. The posts were simple, honest, vulnerable in a clinical way. The blog gained traction slowly. Comments, emails, shares. People told him their stories. A man whose sister maxed out his student loans. A woman whose partner used her identity to get medical care. Stories like his, hidden behind polite silence. He wasn't alone, and that mattered. He started offering guides: how to freeze credit, how to spot fraud, how to file police reports. The blog evolved into a project, then a platform. He called it Known. Not flashy, not dramatic. Just a place where victims of personal betrayal could learn to reclaim their names, their ground, themselves. His first full article was titled, How I Caught the Thief Who Raised Me. It was clinical, detailed, stripped of emotion. No pity, no rage, just facts. It ended with a single line, one that felt truer than anything he'd said in court. Sometimes, surviving means becoming a stranger to the people who built you. One evening, he stood in his apartment and looked out over Portland. His world hadn't changed, but he had. He no longer waited for an apology. He no longer hoped for reconciliation. The absence of love didn't leave a hole, it left space. And in that space, he was building something better. He folded the old credit report, the check, the court documents, and sealed them in a box. On the lid, he wrote a date. Then he slid it into the back of his closet. Not to forget, but to remember what it took to become himself again. Chapter 6: The Quiet Justice. A full year passed before Ethan heard her name again. It arrived in an envelope, final notice of completed restitution. The court acknowledged that Carla Daniels had fulfilled her obligations, Legally, the case was closed, but Ethan had already closed it long before, not with signatures, but with distance. He placed the envelope with the others, in the same box in his closet. He didn't open it. He didn't need to see the final number. No transaction could erase what had happened. Money returned wasn't trust restored. Some debts couldn't be measured in dollars. His credit score had improved slowly, enough to re-enter polite financial society. But he still lived carefully. Each form he filled felt like walking a minefield. Every job application, loan request, or contract brought back a flicker of doubt. Would his name still trigger suspicion? Sometimes it did. But the difference now was this. He had rebuilt from the ground up. He had chosen every new password, each authentication method, every single layer of protection. It was exhausting, but it was his. No one else's fingerprints would touch his future again. That promise was carved deep. He eventually bought a small condo in a quiet part of Portland. Nothing fancy, just enough. The papers were signed under his new name. The keys were cold in his hand, but they felt like fire. Not because the space was grand, but because it was clean, untouched, unborrowed. He furnished the condo with purpose. Nothing excessive. A couch, a desk, a dining table for two. On the wall, he hung a single frame, the blog post that started everything. The title was bold, black letters on a white background. How I Caught the Thief Who Raised Me. He'd stopped checking the blog's analytics. It no longer mattered how many people read it. What mattered was that it existed, that somewhere someone else might find it late at night, heart racing, questions piling up, and they'd see proof. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You can fight back. Sometimes he still walked by the river, the same stretch he'd walked after that first denial. But now he walked slower. No anxiety, no racing thoughts. The silence wasn't threatening anymore. It was calm, rested. The absence of crisis had become its own form of peace. He never contacted his mother again. She hadn't reached out either. Their story had ended with a transcript and a courtroom. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final reckoning. Just silence. And in that silence, Ethan had discovered something unexpected. Closure isn't loud. It's quiet, like turning off a light. Friends sometimes asked about his past. He gave vague answers, said there'd been some fraud that he had to rebuild. Most didn't press. The ones who mattered understood, and that was enough. He didn't owe anyone the whole story, not anymore. It belonged to him now. He started mentoring young professionals entering cybersecurity. Not about coding, but about ethics, boundaries, trust. He told them the truth. Sometimes the biggest breaches don't come from the outside. They come from the people you're supposed to be safe with, and that's why the hardest firewall is personal. He never saw Carla again. In the quietest moments, her image still surfaced. The scent of her perfume in a crowd, a laugh that sounded too familiar, but it never lasted. The woman she'd been in his mind had died long before the court case. What remained was memory, unthreatening. One rainy evening, Ethan made tea and stood by the window, watching headlights blur through glass. He thought about what he'd lost, his name, his trust, the idea of unconditional love. But he also thought about what he'd gained: clarity, independence, self-respect. There was power in knowing what you'd survived. He sat at his desk and opened a blank document, not for another blog post, just for himself. The title he typed was simple: Evidence of Healing. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to the courts, not to her. Only to himself. And in that moment, he smiled. Not because justice had been served, but because peace had been chosen.